Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Coping Together. I'm facilitating today's episode. My name is Alan Bruns, and I'm one of the program coordinators for the Mental Health Connections program at MHACF. Our guest today is Chad Brown, who is a career counselor and professional development consultant with extensive experience helping others through his unique background in public administration, corporate consulting, and mental health counseling. Chad's career counseling practice specializes in serving high school and college students, professionals of all ages and experience levels, and even assistance with retirement planning or life after career. Given Chad's unique experience in the fields of mental health and career counseling, that brings us into our subject today, which is career counseling. So Chad, thank you for taking the time to meet with me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's my pleasure.
Of course. So we could just jump right into the questions. And I guess a great way to start off would be simply asking, what is career counseling and what drew you to it?
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to start there to kind of define what career counseling is versus kind of the greater terms and all the different professional roles there. Before I go a little bit more personal into the answer of that, I had a resource I wanted to share, and I promise I won't speak to notes all day today. But I am a member of the Florida Career Development Association, FCDA, and their national body is the NCDA, the National Career Development Association, just like there would be the American Counseling Association for general counseling. And so I'm going to share their definition first, and then I'll also talk about personally what it means to me. So the NCDA, they say first, career development is the sequence of career-related choices and transitions that we all make over our entire lifespan. Now, what's interesting is their definition of career counseling is the process by which a professional counselor provides assistance to an individual or small group so they can make informed career choices and transitions. The assistance might include mental health counseling, in-depth therapy, and extensive assessment, as well as the provision of career information and a focus on career decision-making. So very formal definitions there, but I wanted to start there because I really like that. And why I think that's important is, thank you for the introduction, because I specialize and I identify my brand as a career counselor, but I also work a lot with guidance counselors, academic advisors, all different people. Thinking back to our general definition of career development, there's a lot of professionals, and I'm very much passionate about that I do my part in this that I'll tell you about in just a moment, but I also am very mindful of how do we connect, holistically and kind of borrowing from some of the social work models and things like that of how do we really, integrate all of the public, private and individuals to kind of come together. And honestly, and as you can maybe see above me, my motto for my company that I came up with is that my goal, and I think the goal of all career counselors, is to help people discover their personal purpose, but then also develop the professional potential. So what I'll also share a little bit about that is, to me, that's a very important 2 stages to consider, because it doesn't really help you if somebody says, I'm going to get you what I think is the best job, if it's not personally appropriate for you, if it isn't in line with your values, your interests, your personality, other things like that. So I'm very intentional when I work with clients of starting with that first part of discovery and laying down a good foundation of getting to know the client, getting to know uniquely kind of what they're going through. And I think that also leads to the answer of how I help people. Because that very much, as with any probably good business, and especially counseling, would depend on the client, right? And depend on the client's needs. So, some quick examples I can introduce to you right now. And your introduction did a great job of, I think, saying some of this. I break down the different groups I work with sort of into 5 categories of high school students, college students. And college, by the way, that might be first semester. I have no idea what major to pick, or that could be I'm about to graduate, right? And anything in between. And then also young professionals, so people that have recently graduated. Maybe we have a couple of years of experience. We're trying to figure out how to promote ourselves and promote our brand and things like that. And then the one that you mentioned as well that I find just so fascinating and that I've worked a lot with lately is the experienced professional, and whether that is career development all the way until retirement, but also looking at, as we live longer, maybe we retire younger, maybe we take on a part-time job and we serve on a board of a nonprofit. I mean, so many different, non-traditional to a couple decades ago, ways that we approach what to do during career and after career. So that was kind of my greater answer to career counseling. Would you like me to tell more about my personal story and why I do career counseling? I think I heard that.
Yes, I'd love to hear like how you found your way into it for sure.
Perfect. Yeah. And so why I also intentionally always make sure that I introduce those different kinds of client types is because I very much identify with being many of those people, and seeing those and people I know and I care about every day. So long story short, born and raised in Central Florida area, third generation actually. And I was a product of Seminole County Public Schools. I had a great experience there. However, and to tie this to career counseling, one of my biggest memories of high school, and one of a lot of people I went to high school with, was a lot of the standardized academic testing and things like that. So while I had a good experience in high school, and I don't want to vilify any of that, I left high school like a lot of young people, I think, with limited self-awareness and probably very low awareness of what careers are available, what college should I go to, why should I be going to college, how is this going to connect to my career? So ultimately, I made the decision that I think a lot of young people do of, I'm going to go to college because that's where we figure those kinds of things out. That's what we're supposed to do when we go to college. So I went to UCF for my bachelor's degree, University of Central Florida. I will tell you honestly, a big part of the decision making was because it was in my backyard. And it's a great school. However, again, like I said, going into there, I probably I had no idea what major to pick, and I hear that so much from people I work with. So that's why I want to say it out loud. And also to tie in, as much as we talk about schools and institutions and how they should be serving people, also mentioning personal accountability here. Because, I never knocked on the door of academic advisors, career development, and statistically, unfortunately, that's a problem because that is very, very common, right? That most young people and people of all ages, they don't always reach out. So we need to figure out how to make sure, again, all those forces are out there and we're connecting people. So to tie up my story here for you at the bachelor's degree, I knew I wanted to help people, knew I wanted to make a meaningful difference in my community. And when I looked at psychology, there were things about it I wasn't comfortable with at the time. What I'll mention is I did not have any idea what are all the different things a psychologist does, and also what's a counselor, what's a social worker, what's a psychiatrist, all the mental health professionals. I had no idea, who they were and how they all interact with each other, right? So I didn't pick psychology. And I ended up picking public administration, and I enjoyed it, and I really did. And I enjoyed the brief interactions I had with it. But what I experienced immediately upon graduation, and that a lot of people do, I feel like, is the reality. So where sometimes we have the academic theory of going to school for something, but the importance of experiential learning, right? Of hopefully within academic curriculums, doing internships and even interacting with informational interviewing, talking to real professionals that are working in the field right now. So I wanted to help people make a difference in my community, and I entered into Orange County government briefly, with kind of an entry level, administrative type of job, and it was a great job. But what I discovered personally, and what a career counselor probably would have helped me figure out, is that I, at this stage in my life, and still right now, want to be a direct practitioner. I want to directly work one-on-one with the people I help, and in a very intimate counseling type way. And I just figured out that an administrative type role at more of a a meta community-wide level wasn't really where I wanted to be full-time employed. That was a moment also to point out a struggle that a lot of people I work with go through of, I went to school for this and I don't really think it's what I want to do. So do I transfer my skills into something related, or even retell my story and rebrand myself, rewrite a new resume, things like that? Or should I consider going back to school and achieving additional credentials? I ended up deciding on the latter. And I'll also point out one thing I'm very mindful of when I work with clients of, having somebody who's impartial, who can, a counselor who can really process all these options with you, the emotions and the feelings. But also what I would say, leaning into career counseling a bit here, is also getting into more of the strategic discussions of, I have resources and, and charts that I'll use with clients where we might put the different college options. And even before we assume we have to go to college, by the way, also looking at certifications and things like that. And looking at, is this required? And what's the ROI and the plus minuses if I pick this option versus that option? And so just to continue with my story for you, I ended up going back to school, and that took me over to Rollins College, where I achieved my first master's degree in business. So I have an MBA, identified immediately with management, marketing, things like this. I am not a financial analyst. And things like that. And the reason I mention that is because when I work with clients, I'll show them sometimes assessments that I'll use and things like that. And I can see so clearly now that, having the opportunity to talk to a high quality career counselor and have access to really good resources, it really tells the story when you go back and look at it. So, but I'll also mention right now, because I think it's important for anybody that is listening to this, or anybody that wants to pass this along to others. I do work with young people and try to set them on the right path and preventative maintenance. But I also, and as I've told my story, and I will continue, I really do believe that, it's more common than not sometimes that we do struggle. We say, man, and there's words that come out of that, and words I've said before of, did I waste my time? Did I do that? Yeah, should I have done that? And again, where a career counselor helps is, every day it's interesting to the discovery part, figure out where we would like to go, but back to, we can tell a story. We can mention what are the strengths of what you did there and how we bring it together. So upon getting my MBA from Rollins, I did work in international business for about 7 years. Long story short, it was a company that made telecommunications type products. So manufactured payphones back in the day, and then kind of evolved their business into wireless infrastructure projects. So there were two significant results of that. Is A, they made everything in China and sold it all over the world. So I was traveling everywhere. And also I was working a lot with very technical engineers and analysts and things like that. So I was starting to discover, my strengths as a counselor, but also I was getting very burnt out. Because, and as we hear a lot about, and sometimes we have to live through lessons rather than hear them, but that money doesn't make you happy. And I don't want to oversimplify that statement. I don't really like that way of looking at it, but the way I would look at it and talk about it as a counselor is one factor may not make you happy. And if one factor is really important to one other person and it's not the same as yours, that's when we have problems. So there's nothing wrong with going for a high paying, job that we all think is really prestigious if it's what you want to do. But there's also looking at the other factors and things that I would do when I work with a client of, like I mentioned earlier, to kind of broadly introduce that: values, interests, personality, also reality, right? Family, do you have kids do you need to think about here? Do you have aging parents? All kinds of things that go into decision making about career. So to wrap up my story, it was that point when I probably took my first deep breath and thought about career and what's my purpose in life. And that brought me back to Rollins, where I achieved my second master's degree. And so it is a clinical mental health counseling degree, and I am a licensed mental health counselor, but I typically do focus on career counseling as kind of the central topic of what we will focus on in our discussions. Now, with that said, and last thing I'll mention before, I want to make sure I give you plenty of time to ask me anything else you think is valuable here. But with that said, something else I'm seeing a lot, and possibly also is, really emphasized with COVID and this quarantine and all this, is the trauma that that jobs can provide you, that can have on you. And so even before all of the COVID, I've worked with clients that had, terrible experiences with abusive management, right? And it's followed them. And I don't really go into deep diagnosis sometimes with certain clients, but, generally speaking, there's some PTSD symptomology happening here of, people feeling anxious, having flashbacks, and same thing if you lost a job unexpectedly. But, as much as our jobs can make us feel fulfilled and happy, that's where the counseling piece comes in is, man, they can really have an impact on your, I always say, mental, physical, and spiritual health.
And like you said, a lot of people don't really, career counseling is, from my experience, something that people a lot of times don't know even exists. It's an option for them. And I found that very fascinating that an option specifically focused on career does exist, and people can look at it from a bunch of different aspects as a counselor you would do. And just kind of leading into that, you talked a little bit about also like the effects that being in a career with an abusive, management or whatever can have a very detrimental effect on your mental health. So could you maybe talk a little bit about what does the role of being perhaps in the wrong field or working a job that you dislike, what does that career sort of aspect look like in regards to mental health? What effects does it have?
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. And that's what I find so fascinating about what I do as a career counselor is, I can see so many, virtually every mental health diagnosis, coming through sometimes and how our careers affect us. Some of the more popular things, would be anxiety and depression. And especially tying that to whether we look at I think there's a couple ways we could look at this of the day-to-day job, and that could be maybe more the coworkers, manager, company culture. And then also looking at, and again, maybe it's just on my mind because of what we see so much right now, but the greater, economic factors of, I love my job. My manager's a great person, but, we had to lay off everybody, or we had to close the doors. And how does this work? So, and one other thing I'll mention about that too, is I think, as I mentioned earlier, I identify as a career counselor within the career development practice, right? And so what that actually probably means is that maybe I speak with some bias here, but as a career counselor, I probably bring some more refined counseling skills than certain career development professionals might, who have very limited engagement, say with a student, other things like that. However, why I bring that up is I also will refer and work collaboratively with other mental health professionals. When I might work with somebody and say, let's focus on career, but I think, there's a specialist over here who could really help, effectively with this. Especially maybe if we go into the trauma discussions and, whether that's EMDR, or other things, and if appropriate, bring in, medication management. But yeah, again, depending on, and I think that's an important thing for me to say out loud, but also for everybody to remember. And even if you're not a mental health professional, but how can I be the best professional I can be? But also, again, how can I have that team, right? And to know that person is going to also collaboratively be able to provide the best services, for this person.
That's a great way to look at it. And I like that you focused and talked some about like college students that may be, because I know from my experience, being a college student just very recently, that sometimes people come in and they don't know what major they're looking for. They don't know what they want to do. And sometimes it's hard to navigate because, like you said, maybe through your high school career, it hasn't been easy figuring out what you want to do. And then you're thrust into a world where you need to figure that out. Or some people switch majors multiple times just trying to figure out. But to kind of branch a little bit off of that, I did mention in your introduction that you also worked with like retirement planning or life after career. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that and the kind of struggles that they have and how you would assist them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to introduce the point, it's very evident in, the different ways that we work and across the lifespan and again, career development. So, maybe, to generalize, but maybe, decades and decades ago, people might go work for the one company, they might, get their retirement and these things. But what we're seeing now, right, is more career progression, going to different companies, throughout your whole lifespan. And also a lot of people, especially young people, working multiple jobs and things, right? So we're very active throughout our lifetimes as professionals. And to kind of simplify the point here, some people want to sit on the front porch in a rocking chair or on the beach at the day after retirement and just, sit in solidarity and isolation and maybe just meditate for the rest of their lives. But that doesn't seem to be a lot of people I interact with or I hear from, right? We want to do some of those things now that we don't have to go to work. But, a lot of it is, a couple of interesting things of, a kind of probably the most significant large way of looking at this is, especially if somebody has excelled in their career, now they've lost a whole aspect of their identity. Not just the odd things of I don't know how I shouldn't have to get up and go to work anymore, but that was who I was. People referred to me as that. People respected me, and all these things. So it's not replacing it, but what I do a lot with people. And as I introduced earlier, a lot of those things that I look at with people are deep to your core, who your personality, your values, your strengths. And so again, just like we might translate how that could go from one job to another throughout your lifespan, I see it sort of as a translation into retirement. And I think it's very important, I just thought of this as well, to be aware of who you talk to and your terminology, right? Because retirement can be a great word to some people, other people it's a sensitive word. So, and so that's kind of why I say life after career sometimes and other elements. Couple last points I'll put on that. It also can be, it depends on the client, because what I've experienced is it can be total evolution into not working anymore at all. How do I spend time with family and kind of getting into a very personal development side of that? It also could be maybe consulting, taking a part-time kind of job, or something that I would advocate for, and I think we would agree on, and hopefully everybody that listens to this, excuse me, serving your community, volunteering, serving on a nonprofit board, because often, again, these people have a ton of experience, expertise, connections, and want to, and where I see that as a win-win again is really helping the community, obviously, but people. Back to career, right? People like to be valued. People like to give back, and to know that they're, they have a meaningful purpose and they're able to deliver that. So.
I know that's been a factor with a lot of people because a lot of their identity was in their career. Like you mentioned, they were respected for what they did. They, they were that for so many years, and it's hard for them to move into something new or to even stop doing it in general. So I very much appreciate that you talked about that. And to kind of close this conversation for my last question, I feel it would be, unjust if we didn't mention that COVID-19 has changed so much about going to work, getting a new job. It's changed so much about work in general. So to kind of branch a little bit off that, how do you think that the hiring or interviewing process is going to change because of COVID-19 in terms of training, interviews, things like that? And do you have any recommendations for people who may be looking for a job during this time in adapting to that virtual format?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think you mentioned it kind of, in your question of obviously, and sort of at the nature of what we're doing right now, seeing so much of this evolution into virtual and technology. Yeah, one thing I'll mention is, honestly, this probably accelerated the process in some regards. Even before all of this, we were seeing a lot more video interviewing and technology being used by companies. So, this isn't a total surprise, and probably, and like I said, I think it accelerated it. It pushed it across the door, and it's here to stay in some regards. So, to answer your question, and it's a tough one, I'm not going to lie, and say, this is the company where is hiring and it's a rosy picture. It's really tough out there right now, right? If you look at, certain positions, you'll see hundreds of applicants, maybe thousands of applicants. So a couple things I'll point out that I would recommend is, first, and again, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to others if you want to process this discussion, because I don't want to oversimplify it. But typically, I would be more open in the past to recommending people leave a good job and to say, let's find something that makes you happy. And I'd speak as a counselor. But now, I think it's a balance, right? Of, let's talk about it. I know you don't love every aspect of your job right now, but, is the culture terrible? Is it unethical? Do you feel danger there? Should we consider, and maybe I'm not telling you not to leave the job, but let's talk about strategy, immediate, short-term, long-term, do you think you're going to be able to secure another job? Again, a lot of this goes back to personal factors. Do you live alone, with minimal expenses? Or do you have a huge family to support? All kinds of things that really are going to play into what we should do or not be doing. The other thing, and it's a very good general best practices I can provide right now is, thinking of whatever you can do to increase your skills and whatever you can do to differentiate yourself from other people out there that are looking for similar things. And that's, by the way, advice I would give to anybody. I mean, even people that have the same college degree, right? So what do we do to kind of look at that and to figure out how I might navigate from here to there? And then the final thing, I'll give a little a plug to a resource that I use, and I pay a professional membership for this, but I think they have a free trial for people. JobScan, I think .co is the address, but if you just Google JobScan, you should be able to find this. They are a resource that will allow you to upload your resume and upload a job description and to see how you're scoring with what they call the applicant tracking systems, which are basically the robots that scan your resume for keywords. So the issue there is, if you're applying for a very competitive job where especially Fortune 500 companies probably aren't going to be reading the resumes at the beginning, very good chance they're going to go through this kind of ATS system, they call it. So check that out. I know we're running low on time. I don't want to go too long into anything here. But introducing that as a resource, I'll allow you to, if you want to talk about anything else, we can. And then I also will throw out, if anybody wants my contact info, I can share that, or I don't know if you provide that when you post this. But people can always contact me as well. I'm definitely happy to talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely going to put all your information in the comments section below. If you're interested in talking to Chad, speaking with him about some of the things that we've talked about today, or just about, things that you're going through in regard to career, or, any of the subjects that we covered, retirement planning, things like that. I know that you're very knowledgeable, obviously, about all these things. So we'll definitely have all this information below. In addition, we're going to have our information for the Mental Health Association in the comment section below. So in case anyone wants to get in contact with us, everything will be there. But just to close this, Chad, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. I thought this was an amazing conversation. It was such a pleasure hearing all your perspectives on all these topics.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And as I shared, with my personal journey, that I'm very passionate about career counseling. Absolutely. So happy to talk about it anytime, return and do something like this. And as you mentioned, anybody feel free to reach out to me with simple questions. And I always provide a complimentary initial consultation for anybody. So no pressure, no stress. I won't ever sell it to you. But I'm very passionate about it. So I always love talking to anybody about career counseling.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chad. And thank you everyone for watching, but have a great day. And everyone, thank you for joining us.